I'm John Kersey, and prior to me seeing you live and in person, these are a couple of the people that I've spoke with in anticipation
Yeah.
of talking about the student strike in 1970. The person you're going to see at the second part of this video is an adjunct professor at Kent State. Her name is Susan Zimmerman, and Susan was a student at Kent State that particular day.
Wow.
So you're going to hear her story. But first, you're going to hear from the guy who wrote this book, The Spirit of 71, the chronicle of his class at Wabash College. John Pachter, one of the Mr. Super Wabash fans, class of 1971. And guys, I would strongly encourage you to look at this whole book. I think the Dr. Gilman is sharing with you one chapter of it, but the whole book tells a phenomenal story about, in my humble opinion, perhaps the most tumultuous period in the college's history, that period in the late 60s and early 1970s, because of unusual combination of transformations that were going on that affected both higher education nationally and in Indiana, and then external factors such as Kent State and the war in Vietnam really was, in my mind, the precursor more so than just what happened at Kent State. But we'll get to that with John in just a minute. But John, I do want to start with that as like an entry point. Do you remember where you were, what you were doing as a junior, I believe, at Wabash when you heard about what had happened at Kent State?
No, I don't remember it. I remember it was quite an event that energized about everybody in some way or the other. There were four students that were peaceably gunned down by the Ohio National Guard. And of course, we were all college students. There had been other violence on college campuses, but nothing like that.
Yeah. There was a 2 o'clock meeting that had been planned before the Kent State shootings to talk about Nixon's invasion of Cambodia, which had just been announced the week before. And the Student Senate was pretty active with the National Student Association that was setting up activity all over the country. Again, before the shootings at Kent State. Could you, and I know you could talk about this for an hour, but could you kind of give today's students a feel for what it would be like to be a student at Wabash on a campus in a time when there's not only warfare, but there's a lot of division in the country about whether we should be in the war in the first place?
Well, there was also a lot of division on campus. Our campus, that was unique to our campus for the most part, one of which was co-education. In Wabash go co-ed. That was one that was going on. The draft was everything for most of us. If the student, if you got a deferment, a low draft number, you were pretty much safe from being drafted. If you got a high number, you were safe from being drafted. If you got a low number like I did, that really affected the way you looked at things. If you were in the middle ground, or you weren't sure whether you were going to be drafted or you weren't, that was an issue. And then
One
you
of the
and
one
then you
of the
knew people. Your friends were in those groups, so even if you had a high number, your friends had low numbers. And war was at best confusing. There were a lot of people in favor of supporting the war, even at Wabash, and it was a tough time.
yeah. One of the pictures I'm going to share with this group is one I got from the archives at Kent State, and I think it was Phi Gamma Delta chapter there. All the juniors were holding up, or all the seniors were holding up their numbers. There's like about 20 of them, and they're all holding up their draft numbers in the picture because they were trying to symbolize how significant that was and how transformational that would be in their lives. And your book really, I think, chronicles that quite well. Um, Tell us a little bit about the actions that Wabash's students took after the murders at Kent State.
Well, about the same time, it was roughly the same. It was about the same week in May, May 6th, in the days before and the days after. One of the most important things that had happened was a vote to have a student strike. And nearly half the enrollment showed up at the chapel and voted, which I find quite astounding.
Yeah.
And the vote was reasonably close. I don't remember what it was, but
About 300 to about 160 is
yeah,
what I think it said in one of the books. Yeah.
it just shows some division. And then there was another vote the next day about Bobby Seale, who was a Black Panther, was up for trial, and some of the black students were pushing that, trying to connect it with the war.
Yeah.
And they made some success with it, and that passed. But now the students have voted to go on strike, and what did that mean? Nobody ever gone on strike as a student. We weren't employees, uh, and then there was this other issue: is how the administration going to react to students going on strike. So eventually, the faculty had a couple of votes. Faculty voted pretty close. I think there were like 3 votes difference, and
Yeah.
came to the
30,
conclusion that
37 to 37 to 34 to support the student strike.
and they didn't all agree uh, on their vote. So the vote for the student strike didn't mean that all those 37 were faculty who favored the war. A lot of this is explained pretty well by Peter Frederick's write-up afterwards that was printed up. That's very useful document to understand what happened in this particular week. But anyway, the faculty, I think, allowed students to go on strike if they wanted to. Classes would go on. Those who didn't show up would not be penalized. I think there was a 3-day period for this. By the time 3 days was running out, maybe this was the brilliance of the faculty. Weekend came. There were fun things to do on the weekend. Uh, Other things happened. Finals were coming up, so the strike eventually ended. Maybe not officially on that weekend, but effectively.
Yeah. Some faculty members actually offered some type of educational alternative to classes, according to the record, right?
They did. And if you ask me what I did, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have been the one who didn't gone out on strike. I probably went to classes, but I have no remembrance of that. I wish I had kept notes or something about that, but I guess that's a regret of a lot of older people.
Yeah. John, what's your opinion? Was the tipping point the shootings and the dead at Kent State? Was it Nixon making the decision to go into Cambodia, effectively expanding the war, or some combination of both that kind of
Okay.
precipitated Wabash and all these other colleges and universities into action?
My recollection and from my reading was a combination, but really it was going into Cambodia and expanding the war. That was an issue. And one of the things I'd like to say about this era, not only about the war and the strike, uh, but how much Wabash students were really energized and being the activists, not necessarily activists in protesting, although there was that, but just activism all around, even though at the same time they complained about people being, say they, my contemporaries and I probably complained about people being apathetic. It just really wasn't the case. To get 500, 400 and some students in chapel voluntarily to vote on a serious subject, hey, that's pretty amazing. That was all student generated, but there was also the quality of the people who were writing for the bachelor who went out and covered everything. And then the rise and development of the radio station was almost all student driven. The coeducation was not totally student driven, but there were probably more students at the time favoring coeducation than there were, I'm sorry, more favoring going co-ed than there were staying the same. Survey was done and students, that was done by a trustee appointed committee of faculty, students and others, and did that survey. There was just a lot of activism by students. Another active part was the integration of fraternities. So there was just a lot going on. I looking back, I'm just amazed and proud how much students got off their duff and did so much.
Yeah. Susan and I have been adjuncts together at Kent State. She still is an adjunct at Kent State University, still teaching here. And she's also been an adjunct for many years where I teach at Tri-C, Cuyahoga Community College. And she also was here at Kent State as a student in May of 1970. So, Professor Zimmerman, where were you and what was your actions and reactions to what was going on at Kent State, not just on May 4th, but the days up to and then immediately afterward? And I know this is a very open-ended question, but we've talked about it before, so yeah. I know your story,
it's
so
okay.
Please relate for the students.
You're not the first one who's asked, but I probably will burst into tears. Yeah, I was a student, a reporter at the Daily Kent Stater newspaper. Back on Sunday morning, I think about 11 a.m., and the National Guard was on campus with what appeared to me, a 19-year-old student, to be tanks. It turned out they were troop carriers, not tanks, but they looked like tanks to me. And my mom and dad were pretty appalled as well about the whole situation. I lived in Lake Hall, which is just across from where the Guard stood. The Guard were standing maybe 200 feet from my dorm when they fired. So I was right in the heart of campus. And I could look out. I was actually on the other side of the dorm. When I got back to my dorm room, I could look out to the old football stadium, which is where the Guard was bivouacked, I think is the correct word. I went to my classes on Monday morning wearing my mini skirt. And then after my classes, I went back to my dorm room and changed into my blue jeans. And then I went to the noon rally, which I, again, was not assigned to cover, but, pretty much all the student newspaper staff was there, either taking pictures and the yearbook staff as well, of course, taking pictures and just, being on hand if we were needed, keeping our own records of what was going on. So when the Guardsmen, I was on the north side of Taylor Hall, but at the top of the hill. I wasn't part of the crowd of protest. I mean, I was part of the crowd, but I was at the northern end at the sidewalk outside Taylor Hall, facing north, facing the Commons, facing the bell that was rung whenever there was a rally. And the Guardsmen, as is shown in the film at the May 4 Visitor Center, the Guardsmen came in a Jeep, and I think a campus police officer was riding with them with a megaphone announcing that everybody had to disperse. And of course, everybody just ignored the announcement and stayed put, and the Guardsmen began advancing across the Commons, and they split into two groups. One went on one side of Taylor Hall, and the other went on the other side of Taylor Hall. And I think I came up through the building. So I was standing on the front porch, and I still didn't really, even though they were armed, we and all the professional media had been told they did not have live ammunition. So we thought they might have rubber bullets or, some other tear gas, obviously, other means of dispersing the crowd. But we had been told that the Guard did not have live ammunition. All of a sudden, a line of Guardsmen knelt down and aimed their rifles at the student protesters. And at that moment, that's when I realized that it was serious. And I went running into the building to get the Daily Kent Stater editor that quarter, was a guy named Bill Armstrong who had served in the Army. We were just on our way. I said, "You got to come out there. It's getting ugly." And we were going out the back door, the door on the side of the Commons, to go around the building, when we heard what I thought was a helicopter or a bunch of helicopters. And I said, "Is that a helicopter?" And Bill said, "No, that's rifle fire." So we did not go outside from there. We went back up through the building to the main floor of the building. We were in the basement. The journalism school was in the basement of Taylor Hall at that time. And we went out onto the front porch, right where I had been standing previously, and the first thing I saw was blood going down the sidewalk. And most of the students, all but one student, were toward the parking lot from the guardsmen, but that one student was closer to my dorm, and I assume that it was his blood I saw going down the sidewalk. So then, a bunch of students, the remaining students, everybody went into a panic, and I actually ran into the building. I was stringing for Associated Press. Everybody was a stringer for some news organization, and I was calling into Associated Press. I was calling from the payphone, which was the only working phone on campus, perhaps, because we didn't have cell phones, of course, in 1970, and the campus phone system was one big phone system, and of course everybody was trying to either call their folks, call the police, call the ambulance, call somebody, and the phone system went dead.
Kent State shut down.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, everybody. They cleared everybody off campus, and I mean, it was fast. Before we really even had accurate information about 4 students dying here, being murdered here, before we even had that information, the university closed down and sent everyone home. We gathered, we didn't have backpacks back then. They had not yet been invented, I think, but everybody had an overnight bag of some sort. And we went home or went to friends who lived off campus, or, everybody went wherever they could. The faculty, the staff, everybody was thrown off campus. And the college shut down, and we, students, finished the remainder of our classes by U.S. mail. There was no email, there was no internet, there was no cell phone availability. It was all old-time technology, the U.S. mail. Yeah, anyway, many colleges shut down. I believe, if I remember correctly, my best friend from high school came home from Ohio State not too long after I came home from Kent State. I think that a lot of college campuses shut down, and obviously there was this national student strike, which had actually been called in response to the war in Cambodia. But then it very quickly turned into a student strike in support of the students at Kent State in protest of their deaths and injuries.